Welcome to Thursfields Talk Legal, a vidcast series from one of the leading law firms here in the Midlands. I'm Steve Dyson, a journalist who's talking to a range of solicitors at Thursfields on legal topics of wide interest to the public or businesses. Today's episode is all about pensions and commercial property, and I'm going to talk to Stewart Coles, an Associate Director in the Commercial Property Department here at Thursfields Solicitors. Hello to you, Stewart.
Good morning, Steve, and thanks for inviting me to take part today.
No problems at all. Stewart, we're here to talk about pensions and commercial property and how to link these two subjects together to create an alternative source of funds to support businesses. How does this concept work?
Well, Steve, as you may be aware, certain regulated pension schemes, so we're talking about SIPs and SASs, they can purchase commercial property using the funds in that pension scheme. And then the property then sits in the scheme, and it's an investment. So you can buy most types of commercial property or even agricultural land. You can't buy anything residential in a pension scheme or anything that's got a residential element to it. There are some exceptions, and it's quite complicated. But the general rule is commercial property you can buy in a pension scheme. And these arrangements are often used by business owners to hold their own business premises in their pension scheme. Then the scheme rents the property to the company, to the business. You can have properties that are rented out to unconnected third parties, but it's quite often their own business premises. As long as there's a rental stream there, it needs to be an investment. You can't simply have sort of an empty property sitting there, at least not for too long. And these are sort of often seen as very, very attractive arrangements for a lot of business owners.
Why would a company want to do this, Stewart? And is there a risk of diluting a pensions fund's value by doing this?
So traditionally or typically the main reason would be sort of the tax advantages and the general financial advantages to the pension scheme, to the business owner. Now, that's not something that I get involved with advising on. They'd need a financial advisor to run through the actual the tax implications, the pros and cons of it all. But putting it simply, once the property is in the pension scheme, any growth in the any capital growth, any growth in the value of the property, it is tax-free. So when the pension scheme sells the property, there's no capital gains tax. The rental income coming into the pension scheme from the lease is tax-free. So there are these tax advantages, and it can be very attractive to a business owner to own their premises in their pension scheme. And pay the rent into that pension scheme, so building up the scheme's funds, rather than having to pay rent to an unconnected third-party landlord, or maybe rather than having to pay a mortgage to a bank. They like the idea of, well, the money's going into their pension scheme and increasing in value, rather than having a separate third-party landlord. Also, particularly in the current sort of economic climate and during the COVID pandemic, when people are maybe struggling with cash flow, businesses are struggling a bit more and wanting a bit of a cash injection, it can be an opportunity to use funds that are currently sitting in their pension scheme, which you maybe can't get access to at the moment, to sort of inject that money into the business. So, for example, if a business owner operates from premises that they own personally, or maybe they own in the company name. Maybe they've got a mortgage on that property, or maybe they are renting a property from a third-party landlord, and as I say, they've got a lump sum of cash sitting in a pension scheme, maybe invested in something else at the moment, but something that they can liquidate and use to buy the premises from themselves. So they sell the property from them or their company to their pension scheme. That way, injecting that cash out of the scheme into the business, so the business can then use that money. But at the same time, the pension isn't adversely affected, or at least the value of the money that's come out, they then instead have the value of the property sitting in that pension scheme, which, as I say, is an investment. It will increase in value, hopefully, and it will create that revenue stream from the rent that comes into the pension scheme. So, again, as I say, it's a way of using that money that's sitting in the pension that they can't otherwise use in the business, injecting it into the business. And at the moment, cash and that capital injection for businesses is a really sort of attractive, it can be really useful for businesses at this time. The that there are other ways of releasing money from a pension. For instance, a SAS, and it has to be a SAS. You can't do this with a SIP, but a SAS can lend money to an associated company. So there are a number of rules and regulations that you've got to comply with and requirements to satisfy. But if, for instance, the company or the individual has a property that it can use as security, it can take a loan from the pension scheme. So again, it might be a better option than getting a loan from a bank or a loan from somewhere else. Use the money that's in the pension scheme, loan it to the company, use the property as security, so the pension scheme takes a charge over the property, or you can even take a charge over the shares in the company. And again, it's a way of using that money in the pension scheme to inject it into the business. And that's something that a lot of people are looking at and seeing as a good opportunity at the moment.
Yeah, it certainly seems like an ideal solution for any company that needs cash, Stewart. And it sounds pretty simple on the property side. Just transfer the property and release the funds. What do you need to watch out for?
I think that one of the things that the client needs to be aware of is that it's not just that sort of simple paper exercise that it might sound. People see it as, well, it's my money, my pension scheme, it's my property. I know all about the property, just transfer it across. HMRC's regulations mean that, or require that, the pension scheme treats it as an arm's length transaction, as though you're buying a property from a completely separate party, and you have to go through all the usual legal due diligence that you would do on a property purchase. So that means the lawyer has to carry out searches against the property, has to do all the usual title investigation and inquiries, so that the lawyer can then put together a report to the SIP provider or the pension scheme trustees. We need to make sure that all the paperwork is in place and everything is done as you would do when buying a property from elsewhere. So it can take a bit longer than just signing a piece of paper, transferring the money. And that's something that clients need to be aware of. And I think one thing I always try to stress to clients as well is they need to think about it almost as though when the property is in the pension scheme, it's as though it's owned by a separate party, in terms of you can't just do what you want with the property anymore that you might have been able to do when you owned it personally. You can't just grant a lease or change the terms of a lease or without the pension scheme provider's consent or involvement, and without following certain rules and complying with the regulations. If you don't do things properly, then the pension scheme and even the company can get hit with tax charges. So got to make sure everything's done properly, and just bear in mind that it's not your property anymore. Ultimately, the money all comes back to you, but it's not yours just to do with as you may have done previously.
No, I understand what you're saying. And a point I wanted to ask about, Stewart, if a business needs these funds and acquires them in this way, what about if, for the same cash flow reasons, the same business cannot afford to pay the rent? Are there any rent-free periods allowed?
Well, you do have to be careful with this, and you have to make sure that everything's done properly. Pension scheme trustees are required to act like a commercial landlord would do. So you can't just waive payments of rent or change the terms whenever you want. And ordinarily, trustees of pension schemes would have to go through a process of providing evidence and proving that it is commercially viable and justifiable to give a concession to the tenants, to give a rent-free or a rent holiday. And it was a bit more of a difficult process to go through. You had to get surveyors' reports or things to back that up. However, at the moment, during the COVID pandemic, HMRC have actually issued some specific guidance to pension schemes, which make it a bit easier to do that now. You don't have to go through the same evidence process to back that up, and because these sort of negotiations are happening in the out in the market, landlords and tenants are having these negotiations, agreeing concessions, because it's just what's having to be done at the moment. So they've recognised that, and they've said that yes, pension scheme landlords can agree rent concessions, rent holidays. Ultimately, the rent's got to still be paid as you would do with a third-party landlord. But at least pension schemes can grant those concessions now, and it's made a bit easier during this COVID pandemic. And they've just announced that the sort of relaxation of the rules has been extended until at least I think it's the end of March next year. So we've still got that slight relaxation in place at the moment.
Well, that's good news, and it makes sense. So, Stewart, if a business is thinking of doing this, what are the next steps?
Well, the first thing is it needs to really be led by the financial advisor. So they can discuss the options, the pros and cons, go through the financial implications with the client, also advise on which SIP provider or which SaaS administrator to use, and then they arrange everything. If you don't have an existing SIP, it can take a while to get the scheme registered and to transfer funds into it. But from a legal, so that's the first step. From a legal point of view, I would say it's still important, even while you're doing that preparation, it's important to get the lawyers involved early so that we can, I like to sort of explain to clients the sort of information that I'm going to need in order to put my report together to the SIP provider or the SaaS administrator, and the sort of paperwork that's going to need to be in place so that we can make sure that the clients have got all their ducks in a row at an early stage.
And there are clearly some important processes to follow, Stewart. What are the top tips do you have for getting this done in as smooth a way as possible?
Getting your financial advisor in place early, getting your lawyer in place, talking to your lawyer so that you can get all your paperwork in place, your energy performance certificates, electrical certificates, all these things that the pension scheme is going to need to see. And as a lawyer, we can do all the checks quite early, get the searches in place early, because they're taking longer these days, with councils maybe having longer lead-in times. And it is just that sort of trying to minimise how long things can take by getting everything done early, and using a lawyer who's familiar with this so that we can look at the things that are going to be important to the pension scheme. Things like environmental issues are particularly important to SIP providers. So addressing those at an early stage is always important. And if you're going to want any specific terms in the lease that are maybe not standard, getting those agreed, getting surveyors to support it if we need that, getting all these things in place so that we don't suddenly find later on, actually, you're not going to be able to do this that you wanted to do. And I've had situations where people have wanted to transfer a property into a pension scheme. They've gone all the way down the line with their financial advisor and a SIP provider. And then when it comes to me, I find that actually there's a small residential element to it, a flat above the shop or something, that means you can't buy it in the pension. And we've got to restructure the whole deal. So again, getting the lawyers involved early is certainly a key element to it.
Stewart, it's been illuminating to explore this link between pensions and commercial property with you. If people listening want more detailed advice on how they can create an alternative source of funds to support their business in this way, who should they contact at Thursfields?
Please call me. My details are available. My telephone number is 0121 227 3364. My email is scoles, SCOLES, at thursfields.co.uk, and I'll be able to talk you through the process and put you in touch with the relevant people, financial advisors and accountants that can help as well.
Stewart Coles, an Associate Director in the Commercial Property Department at Thursfields Solicitors. Many thanks for joining us on Thursfields Talk Legal.
Thanks, Steve.
Hopefully what Stewart had to say about pensions and commercial property is something people will find useful. We'll be back soon to talk to more legal experts here at Thursfields about other interesting aspects of the legal world. Thursfields Talk Legal. Thanks for listening.